Thank you, Leon. Well, a very warm welcome to everyone here for the fourth and final module intended to support all teachers with one PEO component of GCSE PE. So I generally hope this session will be of benefit and anticipate high levels of interaction and an opportunity to share ideas and ask questions. So my name is Dane Smith. I'm one of the senior assessment associates at Pearson, and more specifically, I'm in charge of everyone's favorite component 4, the PEP. Okay, so I think it's important that we get an idea of who my audience is. So please use the chat box to introduce yourselves. Maybe talk about or put down where you're located with your international school or here at home. Any experience or maybe a particular question that you wouldn't mind being answered today. Hopefully I can answer all the questions throughout the session, but if not, I can jot them down and consult with Penny and get a brief sent out through Pearson. So I'll just give a couple of minutes for that to see what we've got. Hello, Carla. Welcome, Amy from Qatar. Okay, wow. So we're all spread out everywhere around the country and abroad as well. So, yeah, a big welcome there. So keep them coming through. If there's any specific questions that you want answered today, I can always scroll back through the chat box and get them down. Hello, Stefan, new to Edexcel. Hopefully this will help you. Right, okay, looks like it slowed down there. Anyway, a good opportunity, or a good proportion of the 2 hours will be spent considering an example of one student's work and how the assessment criteria is applied, as well as questions in relation to the assessment of component 4. It will also provide you guys, the delegates, with an opportunity to network and maybe consider approaches to component 4 from other centres and see how other people plan and assess and structure their PEPs. It's hoped that the questions raised can be answered, but as I said, if there is an issue, there's something I can't really answer tonight, I'll consult with Pearson directly and see if we can get those answers out. Or you can provide an email address and I can get those answers to you. What I can't do is give specific answers as to why certain marks were given for particular centres. I can't do that on a public forum. The chances are I probably haven't seen your work as well, considering we have a big team of moderators. Thank you, everyone, for all that information. I'll make sure I track back at some point and look at some of those questions that you've put down. So our session objectives today are to recap or introduce the requirements for component 4, also to identify the characteristics of top band work, apply the assessment criteria to an example, and provide the opportunity for you to ask as many questions as needed. To begin, let's remind ourselves of the assessment structure for GCSE PE Component 4, the Personal Exercise Program. Candidates are required to base their PEP on one of the 3 chosen practical activities or an activity from the activity list in the specification. The 3 main areas covered are aim and planning analysis, carrying out and monitoring their PEP, and evaluation of data and programs. So they're the 3 main areas in the specification, but obviously we know that it's broken down into 5 strands. Component 4 is worth 10% of the total marks of the qualification, and the PEP is marked out of 20. The PEP is internally assessed by the teacher assessors and externally moderated by Pearson through the moderation process. On the slide, you'll see a series of characteristics that are familiar with top band work, although it's important to note that is the ability of the students to successfully apply theory to practice, which enables higher marks to be achieved. The first point to note is that all students should complete pre-tests and evaluate their performance on a specific area before they identify any strengths and weaknesses. This identification must be evaluative looking at pre-tests and performance data. Emphasize, for example, the importance of identifying the most appropriate training method and what the theory is behind the method and how training principles need to be applied. In the evaluation, students need to offer evidence as to the impact of the training on performance, not just on test outcomes. On this slide, you'll see a series of characteristics that are familiar with a middle band piece of work. I'll just let you read through that just for a minute before I move on. And on this slide, you'll see a series of characteristics that are familiar with lower band piece of work. And generally with a lower band piece of work, the work is either things are missing, it's very descriptive in nature. You know, they might be able to raise certain points, but they can't develop those points and relate it back to the actual PEP, their development in fitness or to performance. So when assessing each PEP, teacher assessors should thoroughly read the PEP, including the training record forms, read the generic statement for each strand, noting the key indicators in bold, apply the key word within the levels for each strand, decide whether the evidence just meets, mostly meets, or fully meets the descriptors in the level to determine the appropriate mark within the level of performance for each strand. Use a best fit approach to award the mark that corresponds most closely to the descriptors that have been met. For example, if the content fully meets the descriptors in level 3, then a mark of 12 will be awarded for that strand. And once all that's been achieved, then apply a mark within each level. Now on the screen now, you can see the moderating grid, the assessment grid. This was changed a couple of years ago, very slightly, where you'll see that the top line for strand 2 was originally in strand 1, but it fits a little bit neater in strand 2. So that was changed a couple of years ago. So if you haven't updated the assessment grid, please go to the website and you can download the most recent one. So the marking grid is a support tool designed to help teacher assessors make accurate judgments about the student work and must be used to mark all PEPs. Down the left-hand side, there are 5 strands. For example, strand 1, interpretation and analysis of pre-PEP tests and sporting activity performance. There is generic statement with specific words in bold, which are key indicators of work required within the strand. For example, within strand 1, collect initial fitness and performance data. Each strand has a keyword descriptor to help teacher assessors identify the work with a marking level. For example, level 1 limited, level 2 some attempts, and so on. Please note that the marking grid requirements have slightly changed, as I've just outlined there. So you're now going to see a completed athletics PEP. So please use the assessment grid if you've got one to hand, or you can download that. It might be in your pack, I'm not sure. Hopefully you've either got a hard copy or you can actually have access to the Pearson website. I will give you feedback on each strand, that will be given, but I'll be very much interested to see what marks you give. So I'll look at giving you maybe 20 to 30 minutes to look at the PEP. I'll be judged by your timing. What I like to see within that time frame is you don't have to give a specific mark, but what I'd like is a level at least. If you get the right level, and then from there we can derive from that what the most appropriate mark is. So if there's no complaints, if I give you initially 20 minutes to complete that, and if I need to give you any more time, then we can look at that. So in your pack, you should have an athletics PEP. If you are struggling with that, please let me know in the chat box. And then hopefully maybe Leo might be able to help you with that. But I'll sit back for 20 minutes. Any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Good luck. Speak to you soon. Hello, Rachel. No sound at the moment because I've put myself on mute just while people look at the PEP. So don't worry. We've got about 10 minutes or so before we restart again, so you won't hear from me. It looks like we might be having a few issues with people accessing the PEP. I'm sure Leon's onto that. Got a question here from Josh. I'm assuming this was the mark that was submitted and not the revised mark. So I'm looking on the PEP. It's got 20 out of 20 on there, submitted by the teacher assessor. That is correct. That was submitted by the teacher. It's up to you to determine whether that mark should be adjusted or not. What do you think? It should be a little bit lower, or do you think you can justify that mark? So I'm interested in those comments there. So when you're ready, please feel free to put in your level or your mark. It's up to you. You don't have to put a direct mark, but at least a level if you can. Question from Jamie. Can I just check that the appendix definitely does not count towards the word count? You're absolutely correct. Absolutely does not. Even if you want to embed charts and graphs and tables of data like that into the main part of the PEP, that still would not count. It's only words written by the actual candidate. Hope that clarifies that. Thank you, Tanya. No problem, Jamie. I'll keep quiet for a few more minutes and I'll check in probably about 5 minutes. Hello, Charlie. No, tables, do tables count for word count though in the PEP itself? Well, that depends, Charlie. If tables are embedded within the PEP, and quite often what we see is that people present their work in tables, like for the principles of training. So the words written by the candidate will count towards that, regardless if it's in tables or not. If it's tables of data, etc., then that's fine. But if it's tables of outlining the methods of training or principles of training or smart targets, that's content related, directly related to the assessment criteria and written by the candidate and will count towards the word count. Hope that makes sense. You're right, Kiara. Yep, anything that counts towards it should be in the main body. Excellent. We don't mark the appendix as such, that the appendix is there as reference. Question from Tom. In the example, this sort of work is an appendix. Is that to try and not include in the word count? I think there's a mix on this, and we'll probably would have hit on this later on, but I might as well answer it now. Yeah, I'm looking at the example now, Appendix 4 and 5. Yeah, we wouldn't actually mark that, and there's no need for that to be in there. Appendix really is only for a PARQ or the training logs or any data. But having said that, there's no issue in putting that particular data within the main part of the PEP as well. So why they've got Appendix 4 and 5 like that, I'm not sure, because there's actually no reason for that at all. We only look at the analysis and evaluation within the main body. Right, we're on a bit of a roll here with the questions, which is good. Katie, is it better to explain the SMART targets as an appendix, or is it okay to write it in the main body? Depends what you mean there in terms of explaining that. The whole idea is that you apply the SMART methods and principles of training to your PEP. So you're not exactly giving definitions, but for high band work, you should be able to, or you'll know if candidates know what SMART methods or the particular method and principles of training mean because they're applying it properly. So you don't have to define them per se. It's just the application of those principles within the main body related to the PEP that's important. From Charlie, so if they write in tables to show their SMART targets, this is okay. Yeah, you can, I mean, you can write in tables. It doesn't matter. You can write in tables or continuous prose. It's up to you. But whatever you write, that will be counted towards the word count. My, a lot of opinions out there is that, there's, you know, it's up to you as a center. What do you think is best in terms of presentation? Do you actually need a table, or can you just write it in paragraphs? That's one thing for you to maybe look into and what's best for your candidates. From Amy, definitely top band. Okay, thank you. Quite creative and how the information is typed content and added into the appendix. Well, so that work wouldn't be marked in the appendix. They're only sort of justifying their training with their training logs and fitness data. And that's really what the appendix is for. So that information there on I think it's the principles, smart target and principles, that wouldn't be assessed. The moderator wouldn't assess that. That's correct, Craig. There's as I said, the appendix isn't marked. Interesting point, Tom. We can use that for a discussion. So, Mr. They have tried to include justifications of SMART targets within their evaluation. Would they need to discuss this prior with their choice of methods of training and when outlining SMART targets? Yeah, look, it's almost a reverse, isn't it, from strand 2 to strand 4. You would hope that they would include it to strand 2. I mean, you've picked up a point there that which I'll go through. But really, you want to assess strand by strand as well, so you don't want to penalise someone. Um, for maybe not having it in total in strand 4, but it's definitely a message that we'll put on a report and maybe affect strand 5 and the coherence. If there are a few words with data in a table, those words count towards, sorry, if there are a few words with data in a table, will those words count towards the word count? Technically, yes, anything that's written, but if it's just like a heading or just a sort of labeling an axes or anything like that, then no, it wouldn't count towards the word count. Okay, Josh has put some good points there. We'll have a look at the feedback in a bit. So if I can just ask you now, if you don't mind, either putting a mark or a level, or what you think in the chat box, and then I'll start the commentaries. Keely, the aim in the first sentence in this PEP, in our feedback, we were told that interpretation analysis of data need to be completed before any decision regarding the aim of the PEP. You are right. Okay, and I'll mention that. It's very hard to come up and justify your aim if you actually haven't interpreted and analyzed the data first. Katie, no, they don't have to talk about all components of fitness, only ones relevant to their sport. I'll talk about that now with an introduction. David, I'll probably assume you mean level 4 there. Okay, no problem. Joe, for the candidate, if the principles of training were in the body of the text and not in the appendix, would this have been counted? Absolutely, yep. Is it more desirable to include the titles from the checklist that has been published on the website? Question there from Christopher. That's up to you. It's not essential. The checklist there is there for as a guide. You don't have to use that. If you've got a better checklist, you want to structure it a little bit differently than that, then that's absolutely fine, as long as you've got all the content required. Craig, isn't the macro cycle shown essentially the same as the record sheets? Do they need to include all the record sheets? My advice is yes, all the record sheets should be included because there's important data that they can gather from that to help them with strand 4 especially. Got a level 4 there from a couple of people. Okay, couple of harsh markers, but we're not too far off, I think. Some of the points that people have made are quite relevant, so well done. Thank you, Carly, there. Okay, so if I just take us back to the commentary. Okay, so let's now go through the key points for each strand of the marking grid. Um, I can see that most people there and some people are still putting in some feedback and some marks, and then we'll eventually come to what was given by the moderator for this particular piece of work. So just remember, it was assessed at 20, top of level 5, and what I asked the moderators to do is that we go in with a positive mindset. We look to agree the mark, but if we can't agree the mark, then we must come up with relevant points related to the assessment criteria to justify a mark adjustment. And that's the way we should look at it when we moderate. So initial thoughts and judgments, having read the exemplar. Um, Overall, this was judged as an excellent PEP, so it was level 5. So anyone putting it at level 3, just a little bit harsh there. Level 4, I can understand that. We'll just see what part of level 4 is at the top of level 4. If it is, then you're probably not too far off the actual mark anyway, given by the moderator in this particular instance. Fitness testing data, pre and post PEP were evident. Performance data was evident. Required elements, SMART principles of training and training methods are included and discussed. What level that is, we can talk about that, especially with the strand 2. Training logs are evident, RQ is displayed, and you know, I think the strongest part of this PEP is that it's an excellent evaluation. So the candidate decides to begin the PEP with an overall aim. And as someone mentioned, and although this is not advised, and we would recommend not mentioning this at the start, it seems to be only a generic aim to optimize their performance in the 100-meter sprint. Right? This can be seen as merely an introduction into the PEP, as the aim of all PEPs is to improve performance in a specified activity. So I'd just like to stop on that point. In the past and over the years, and this has improved over the years, as has the PEPs overall, and I'll get into what some of the stats suggest right at the end. It's encouraged that candidates, do a mini research into their sport, give the physiological overview or a fitness overview of their sport, because then that can help with their analysis overall. And so instead of having an introduction, such as, for example, my name's John, I like football, I've been playing football since I was 5, my dad's the coach, etc., which used to be quite prevalent in some of those PEPs. It's more advised to actually do a bit more research into, for example, how many kilometers they cover, what are the main components of fitness, just a bit of research, and that will help maybe specify their fitness test battery. You can include every fitness test, and what you'll probably find is, the games activities, there are more components of fitness required for those sports. Individual activities, you'll find that there's less. So you can include every fitness test if you like, but if you can justify less, and that's fine. If that comes from your analysis, that's also fine. So advice there from me is a little introduction about the fitness requirements for your sport to start with. And then we can start looking at the data for performance and fitness. Anyway, the candidate provides an excellent and thorough interpretation of fitness and performance data, which was included and referenced to the appendix. A battery of fitness tests was conducted, and the candidate was able to give a rationale as to why they use these tests. This is excellent practice rather than completing a random selection of tests with no explanation. The analysis of the data was clear and concise, with specific reference to particular muscles involved within sprinting that led to well-justified conclusions that power will be the most beneficial component of fitness to focus on. Within the example, it's clear that this work clearly meets the criteria for level 5, strand 1, with 20 marks awarded. So in this case, the moderator has gone with what the teacher assessor has given. Now for strand 2, you can see the marks there, but I'll go through the justification first. One component of fitness was selected to form the aim of the PEP. This allowed the candidate to focus on one particular area, giving them the word count to explore this aspect in sufficient depth to allow access to the higher levels of the marking grid. So I'll just stop there again. We have seen in some PEPs, and again, it has improved over the years, that multiple components of fitness have been selected for the focus of the PEP. Now, look, that's absolutely fine. There's no rule about that. The only thing I'll say is that if you select more than one component, then obviously deeper analysis is required to hit those higher mark levels. And remembering you've only got 1,500 words to be able to fit all that in. So one piece of advice, maybe you just look at the main weakness from that fitness element and just focus on that. I'm just seeing a question pop up. No elite data. You don't need elite data. That's, I know some of the exemplars and top exemplars, you've seen that, but there's no requirement to have elite data whatsoever. All right, so if you collect performance data and just compare that against your data in the evaluation, that's absolutely fine. So elite data is more of a task that they do at A-level. If anyone does the Edexcel A-level course, they use that for their physiological analysis. So I just want to make that clear. It's not compulsory to have elite data. If you choose to have elite data to help with your analysis, you may feel that that might help with a deeper analysis. You might actually have some students who perform at a more elite level, as did that swimmer, I think it is, the 20 out of 20 on the website. Then that's fine as well. But just chucking in data for the sake of it is not really what we're looking for. We're actually looking for the analysis as well. Okay, getting back to it, there was a fitness test battery used to help derive the aims and SMART targets. Circuit training alone is not the most relevant method of training for power. However, the candidate did explain in very good detail that weight training and plyometric style stations would be utilized within the circuits. That's actually important. If we think about teachers on a day-to-day basis when they're actually teaching the PEP, the most efficient way of teaching it for a lot of centers is to do circuit training. That's fine, but circuit training can be modified. So if you're looking at aerobic endurance or muscular endurance or power, as we can see here, you can still use circuit training, but my advice would be to maybe talk about how you're going to adapt that circuit to meet the needs of your PEP. Although the candidate was correct that each station should be performed with high intensity, it would be anaerobically based with weight training exercises performed with a heavy load and low repetitions. There was no specific intensity levels mentioned. Also, it would have been more beneficial if the candidate had provided further analysis with regards to specific exercises and why they are being included. A mistake that a lot of PEPs make, this is a side note as well, is that they use heart rate zones for muscular endurance, power, and weight training, where in reality they should be using a percentage of repetitions or repetition max. So just maybe take a little note of that. If you've got anyone who's working on those power strength-based components of fitness, maybe looking at those intensity levels rather than heart rate, where it's not as specific. There were some good links to how training would target specific muscle fibers as a way of improving power and ultimately sprint performance, but a little more depth with specific intensities and specific exercise would assist the candidate in achieving top marks for strand 2. The analysis of principles of training was not completed in enough depth for a level 5, and just mentioning the points and referring to the appendix without much expansion does not fully meet the evaluative standards required for the task. This is an important part of strand 2 and did affect the marking of this section. Nevertheless, the strand is still completed to a very good standard with the information provided, and this strand was awarded level 4 with 13 marks. So just looking at a couple of questions here before I move on. In the feedback from the exam board this year, we were told to include performance data and baseline tests in the main body, or it would not be marked. Okay, well, I don't want to comment directly about the report because obviously I trust what you're saying, but I haven't seen the report. But look, you can put the data in the appendix if you like. Right, the specification says, and I will hit on this later, that data can either be put in the appendix or it can be put in the main body. So if it said that, then it's probably not totally accurate. Right, so that data can go anywhere. Maybe what the moderator is trying to get at is that data can be put in there to help with the flow of the PEP. Right, so that's the only explanation really I can give for that one. Sean, agree with Tom. I don't believe smart targets were included in good detail in the main body of the text. Okay, yeah, and I think it's been moderated accordingly for that one. But yeah, I agree with you. Okay, strand 3. The evaluation of the fitness and performance data was completed to an excellent standard with appropriate use of data to help compare the differences in pre and post PEP results. Likewise, some of the fitness tests were not required to be conducted post PEP. The candidate retests all components of fitness, which is not necessary. However, the data from the other components tested was used effectively when justifying improvements in performance. Key factors as to why this section achieved top marks is the candidate's ability to include relevant and possible adaptations, as well as the continuous link on how improved fitness standards have also improved performance. So the candidate's work matches the top of level 5 for strand 3 with 20 marks awarded. So two main things there, actually 3 main things I didn't quite mention in that little blurb there, but the use of data and percentage increase, I thought that was done very well, and that linked back well with the SMART targets and the individual targets that they gave. Looking at potential adaptations, so linking some of the improvements made or to what potential adaptations may have occurred. Right, so this is where the PEP can be quite useful as a revision tool, especially for component 1. And then also the main thing is linking it back to performance. Okay, I just see a few more questions here. Sorry, it goes up and down. So if I miss your question, I apologize. Sean, why would this get a level 4 then? Well, we don't just assess strand 2 on SMART targets. We also take into account methods and principles of training as well, and the level of an analysis. So it's not just solely on that. And it's at the bottom of level 4 as well, 1 mark above level 3. We were told to include performance data. Yes, performance data is essential. You need that. I think I just made a mention about you don't need elite data. That's up to you if you want that. And compared to elite performers. No, that's wrong. You don't need that. You don't need to compare to an elite performer. If you want to, great, but you definitely need performance data because it's very hard to judge subjectively what your performance is like. Is the mid-PEP test is mid-test PEP data compulsory, or is pre and post data sufficient? No, it says in the spec only pre and post. I know some exemplars have shown mid, and some people have taken that as if you need it now. No, it's not. If you want to include it, then fine, no problem. But no, it's not compulsory to have mid-test PEP data. Got it right there. Okay, individual comments from your reports. It's hard for me to comment, but I'll answer them anyway. To make it coherent, need data and graphs in there. No, I mean, I'd have to see the PEPs really, but there's other areas to make your PEP more coherent than just having data in your PEP. Again, it's your choice. You know, you either have your data in the main body or you put it in the appendix. That is entirely up to you. When it comes to training the moderation team, I'll make sure I emphasize that point. Amy, you're correct. Smart targets and principles were alluded to, but only explained in the appendix. They may be explained in the appendix, but it was analyzed within the main body. Okay, hence the reason why yeah, they did get some marks for that at the bottom of level 4. This was not individual, as was given by moderator for feedback overall. Okay, sorry, Kiara, I don't quite understand that one. I'm not sure, Tom, but what I'll do is if you want to ask another question, feel free to put it in there, but I'll move on to strand 4 now. So the evaluation was sophisticated, included excellent detail and depth regarding all aspects of the strand 4 criteria. All aspects regarding the application of SMART targets, principles, and methods of training were analysed in depth. It was obviously the candidate completed the training thoroughly and explained in detail that how the training plan was modified in and after weeks 3 and 7 in order to allow for greater recovery. A key factor in this evaluation, being given full marks, is not just covering all aspects of the criteria, but the detailed reasoning with specific examples from the training logs supplied in the appendix. So that therefore the candidate was awarded top of level 5 and 20 marks. Now I just want to elaborate a little bit on that point. And this is where your training logs are very important. And this is where people fall out with strand 4. Utilizing the data from those training logs is essential in to be able to justify, the application of the methods, SMART targets, and the principles of training and how they apply those things like specific progressive overload over that 6-week period or 8-week period. Right. So when someone asked before about do we need to have all the training record forms in the PEP, my advice to you is yes, and they should be filled out in detail because it's that data that you collate will help with strand 4. Now that's mentioned also in the strand 4 guidance document, which you can also download from the website. Strand 5, the PEP was completed with excellent coherence and structured with appropriate utilization of scientific and technical terminology. The learner understood the requirements of the task and covered all aspects of the criteria. Excellent detailed training logs were included in the appendix, and it was evident the candidate worked hard in both training and analysing the PEP. There was a slight issue, albeit minimal, with the balance of content in each strand, namely strand 2, which again, something that would be referred to within the report. So overall, the moderator awarded 19 marks, which is towards the top. So overall, this was an excellent PEP. The marks from each strand are added together to get 92, and we divide this by 5 with an 18.4 average. All right, this is then rounded down to give a total mark awarded for this PEP of 18. So we can now use a little bit more time to answer some questions or any reflections on that. So those people who gave level 4, I'll be interested to see what mark you would actually give. If it was 16, then we're not too far off. If you're 17, you're only 1 mark off there. Okay, level 3, I think you're probably being a little bit too harsh there with your marking. Question here from Joanna. I cannot see any, sorry, a question just popped up. Cannot see any analysis of the principles. Please can you actually identify what actually constitutes to an analyze of this section? They simply mention that they have applied principles, not justified. Okay, so analyze, you're obviously, they do mention it. Okay, but they've looked at overtraining. They've looked at the frequency of their circuit training. They've looked at how much they've done over that 8-week period. They intersperse that with physiological adaptations. They also embed information there on reversibility. You can see there that there's 2 decisions on applying principal training positively impacted my performance in both the vertical jump and the 100-meter sprint. And then they go on there then to talk about their test scores in the vertical test, and they use data there, all right, to compare the changes. So there's interspersed there between strand 3 and 4 together. There's also information about the intensities of training, anaerobic threshold, and then they move on to plyometric training and methods of training, as well as their SMART targets over the page. Sarah, completely agree with this mark. If the explanations in the appendices were in the main body, however, if they were, this would be put over the word count. Well, if we look at the appendix, all they've got is, they do have some good information, and you are correct, right? That would help with strand 2, right? The appendix 4 and 5 are mainly related to strand 2, and that would bump up the mark. However, all the other strands, I'm hoping you'll agree, would be relevant to a level 5 piece of work. The evaluation is just under 1,000 words. This is only possible by putting other earlier work elsewhere. Yeah, I think they could have balanced their work a little bit more, Tom. I think strand 2 definitely needed a bit more attention, and maybe strand 1 as well, although they did have the essential information there. Just a little bit of a tidy up in terms of structure is required. But I'm hoping what everyone thinks is that the evaluation was the best part. And the reason why we picked this PEP for the training is because the biggest weakness that we have found over the years is strand 4. Now, I'm not too sure exactly why that is. Maybe students run out of steam by the time they get to the evaluation. Maybe they just simply want to finish that piece of work and just put down the basic information. But strand 4 in this one is definitely a good piece of work. Could Edexcel increase the word limit to 2,000? I don't know about that one, Sarah. That could be, I'm not sure how familiar you are with how things can change at the exam board. There is a long process that you have to go through. So you're probably familiar with how the exams have changed over the past 2 years. That took quite a big process where you have to go back to Ofqual to go through all that. So it's something I could raise with the exam board directly, and they could consider it, but I'm not sure if they'll go with it. But I will ask, just because you've asked that question. Melissa, I feel my students run out of words by the time they get to strand 4. They are then unsure on what to cut out. Okay, yeah, there is a bit of an art to writing the PEPs. I think I'm not too sure of what the standard of the PEPs are, so I'm just going to say something generic here. Do they get to the point? Do they waffle on too much? Because what the exam board are looking for is getting straight to the point, direct analysis. There's no need to have definitions and then explain how you're going to apply. We're just looking for direct analysis straight away. So I don't know, maybe review how they actually write their PEPs early on. So quite a few questions have come up. Yeah, okay, I agree with that. Strand 4 is weaker because students have been trying to put in enough good detail elsewhere, run out of words. Yeah, that could be a possibility. The example is well over the limit, including work in the appendix. Well, we don't count the appendix being marked when it shouldn't. We didn't mark the appendix, so that's okay. Have you got some examples of some 20 out of 20 for strand 2? We do, and I'm going to mention about further help and resources later on, so I'll come back to that one. If I don't mention it, Josh, please remind me. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you, everyone. Good contributions there. So it's very clear that this student fully understands the task that was asked of them, and obviously they have been given very clear instructions as to what must be included and in what order. The checklist is an essential tool for teachers and students to ensure that all aspects of the criteria are covered. I'm not sure if a copy of the checklist is there in your pack, but you can go to the website. I'm hoping everyone has seen that checklist, and I know there was reference to that earlier on in the question. Now, look, using that checklist is not going to guarantee you a certain mark, but what it will do is it will guarantee that you're covering all the content that's required for the PEP. Then it comes down to the candidates individually, whether they're actually providing the level of depth of analysis and evaluation to gain a certain mark and a certain level. So frequently asked questions. I'm not too sure if everyone's familiar with the Ask an Expert service. I'm a part of that, but there is a team of us. And usually what they do, they'll send questions through to people associated with that particular assessment strand. But these are some of the questions that do pop up on Ask an Expert. My students haven't been able to access any performance data, therefore may not be able to evaluate their effectiveness of their PEP. What should they do? Now, this question was asked a few years ago when we're still under the COVID restrictions, so it's not so prevalent now. But other alternatives, I will go through alternatives that club data could be used, maybe inter-school fixtures, intra-school or house competitions. School sessions could be filmed, or any games could be filmed, which may provide an opportunity to practice for potential filming for component 3, so you could double up there. The video could then be played back in lesson where students can make assessments for a notational exam analysis, for example. Performance data could also be gathered from conditioned practices. And we have a document still on the website called Schools Activities for the PEP document from the relaunch comms. Again, that document was derived based on the COVID era. So you can still use it, but it's advised that game data is used more prevalent for the PEPs. It's more realistic data. 2, what happens if the word count goes over the 1,500 word limit? So it's the centre's responsibility that the candidates adhere to the word limit, as the task should be completed within that 1,500 words. So if it doesn't stay within that 1,500 words, then you'll probably find that the marking within strand 5 will be affected. Okay, now look, if it's 1,501, we're not going to jump up and down about it, but that word limit is there for a reason, and everyone has to adhere to it just to make sure that we've got consistency throughout. Otherwise, it becomes an unfair advantage. Do I have to have graphs, tables, and training logs in the appendix? So I think I answered this one before, but I will go over it one more time. The answer to that is no. The specification states that you may place these items in the appendix. They do not form part of the word count anyway. So if candidates do prefer to include them in the main part of the task, then you don't have to have an appendix. That is your option. If you want to use it, fine. If not, you can put it in the main part. It will not go towards the word count. When is the best time of year to start the PEP? Now, maybe I'll put this over to you guys. Maybe it might be best for you to answer this on the chat box. But I will put down some points here. We'll go through it. There's no rule best time. It's really up to you, the candidates and the individual centre. It can be a time-consuming task. Therefore, centres must leave plenty of time to complete the task prior to the 15th of May deadline. A lot of schools don't like doing it in year 11 or the second half of year 11 anyway, just because it does get a little bit too close to the exam season. So a lot of centres start the PEP in the summertime of year 10 with the aim of completing the majority of the tasks prior to the end of the academic year. But I would be very interested to see how you structure it and what time of year you would do that. It'd be great to see people feeding ideas of each other. Last question, how do students justify how they have achieved their aim? So centre staff should encourage students to ensure that they have an overall aim that should be performance-based, supported by a component of fitness. Students can then include specific SMART targets that can be quantified and they feed into the overall aim. Collating physiological data throughout the PEP should be used to help evaluate the effectiveness of the PEP. For example, fitness test data. For those candidates using aerobic fitness, aerobic endurance as their main aim, then heart rate data or resting heart rate data is also encouraged to be collated throughout. Analysis of this data can lead to extended evaluations linked back to relevant sections of the exam component, especially with component 1. The use of quantitative data to measure impact of their fitness on performance should also be emphasized. So I've just seen a series of questions popping up here. So just give me a moment. So we've got a question with fitness tests. Are students supposed to complete a wide range to allow full analysis or just focus on the specific ones to their sport? I'd go with the latter there. Why? Have to ask yourself the question, why would you test a component of fitness that's not relevant to their individual sport? I mean, you can do, but if it plays no real part in the performance level of your sport, then maybe it's not really a test that you would include. But I'll leave that up to you. Sean, I think I've just answered that one. Okay, Tony, if a student is injured, sorry, it keeps popping up and down, bear with me. If a student is injured during the PEP and can't continue with the practical element or any post-PEP data, what are their options? Now, I get this question quite a lot, actually, on Ask an Expert, and this is probably the most prevalent question. So there's a couple of options here. If they've started their PEP and they've virtually gone through, they've almost finished their 6 weeks, then the advice that we give is that we go through more of a hypothetical approach. What were they expecting to get? So I don't know, they've done their planning, they've planned it out, they've done 4 weeks of training, but then all of a sudden they break their leg, so they can't do any more training, um, and they probably won't be able to do any rehab, because of the severity of the injury. Then we go on more of a hypothetical approach to the rest of the PEP and the evaluation, and that would be mentioned within the evaluation or at the start. You actually say that. Other options there, if the injury wasn't so severe, then you could perform the PEP as a rehabilitation PEP. Obviously, guidance from the doctor or physiotherapist, and any data collated from any exercises that they can do can be used as data. So it's not going to be the bog standard PEP. You're not going to have performance data or specific fitness data. You'll use data from specific exercises that are being given to that student to be able to improve their um, basically their fitness to get back to full health again. If it's something where they can't do any at all, so they've started their planning and they can't do any training because again they've broken an arm or leg and they won't be able to do it again, then that's the case and when you would go for special consideration. Hope that answers that one, Tony. Hi Dan, I've just found the examiner's report online and it says that strand one advice for last year, it encourages that all tables of raw data and graphs are included in the main section. That is correct. Yeah, it's encouraged, but you don't have to. Right? You may include it in the main part, or you may put it in the appendix. It is up to you whatsoever. So I wouldn't get caught up on that too much. It is totally up to you. You can either put it in the main part or you put it in the appendix. Right? You won't get marked down here or there, what you shouldn't do, for putting it in the main part or in the appendix. Right? That's spelled out quite clearly in the specification. Tony, I dare say that's May in year 10 for your PEP. Good. I know some people actually start teaching component one in year 10, and when they get up to the physical training, they'll start teaching the PEP alongside that section of component one, around February time. Josh, we were told they must test a range of fitness tests first in order to justify their chosen aim. You are absolutely correct. Carly, did you say tables can go in the main body and do not count as workout? Absolutely, but just bear with me on that one. Just if I just say it again, if it's tables of data, all right, so it's fitness test data or performance data, that's fine, it's not counted. But however, if you're presenting or the candidates are presenting their principles or methods or smart targets in tables, that's fine. It can go in the main body, but it will be counted towards the word count because it's writing that they are putting in their PEP. Hope that makes sense. So question here, can we as teachers create a training record sheet similar to the one prescribed from the exam board? Absolutely. You don't have to use the exam board one. They just provide that one for example. You don't have to use the exam board one. Sorry, can you please repeat implication of going over the word count? Okay, so it's the teacher's responsibility. All right, that's what it says in the JCQ regulations. So it is the teacher assessor's responsibility to ensure that students stay within that word count. If they don't, then that will affect strand 5, the coherence and structure of the PEP. KD, do students have to focus on a weakness component of the fitness of their PEP? If, for example, as a runner, score excellent in the cardiovascular fitness, can they focus on this to improve their performance? Absolutely, as long as you can justify that, that's not a problem. And in that particular case, yeah, they might be a very good runner and they might be able to gather elite data or more elite data. They don't have to, right? But that might be one way of justifying that. So question here, what happens if a moderator has a different interpretation of what is required? From Joanna, we've had a conflict of information. Okay, each time the moderator. Okay, so there is I'm not sure if you're available, sorry, not sure if you're aware, there is what we call an EAR, or review of moderation process. So you can always, look to review the marks. That's a process that the board has. And that's then given to a senior moderator. There'll be 3 of us in the team that then review those marks. So there is a process there if you're not happy with your marks. You could also go through Penny Lewis, and she might be able to give you some more information as well. Okay, this is a good question. I'm glad you asked this one, Charlie. Can we create templates for our students to use? What would happen if many of our students presented looked very similar? Thank you for asking that question, because every year we do have schools using templates. So I just want to make it clear, and I was made aware of a question on social media a few months ago where someone says, or someone asked, can anyone send me a template for the PEP? So I just want to make it known to everyone, templates are not allowed. All right, the JCQ guidelines say that templates cannot be used for NEA components. All right, so please don't use templates. Don't have those pre-worded questions, because they're not allowed. Right, so no templates. To help with structure, I'm hoping that the checklist might help you out with that one. Now, I can see there's a few more questions there. I'll come back to that. If I just can finish off this presentation, and then I'll leave a bit of time at the end and I'll go back through it. Thank you, Charlie. But thank you everyone for all those questions. As I said, I'll go back to them, and I will stay on after this presentation and answer any questions that you may have. That's good news, Joanna. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll finish off, I'll leave this slide for the moment. Actually, I'll move on from this slide, and then maybe at the end we can look at different ideas, and maybe people can get together and see how they structure their PEPs, come up with some different ideas, especially for some of the new staff here who have never taught the Edexcel GCSE, or have never taught the PEP before. So there are many supportive resources aligned for this component or the specification. And the other 3 components, these resources include exemplar material and with commentaries, past papers with mark schemes, teaching and learning materials, as well as teachers can use the Ask an Expert service. If anyone's wondering what that is, Ask an Expert email address is ATE, so lowercase ATE at pearson.com. Right, so you can put your specific question in there about any component, and then that will be diverted to someone who's in charge of that component to answer it. Quite often it will be Penny to answer it, but sometimes it might require a little bit more detail, especially if there's quite a few emails that come through, they're diverted to other people associated with that particular component. Login details for Results Plus can be organised through your exams officer. This site allows centres to identify areas of strengths and weaknesses in performance relative to a national context. One resource that is almost ready to be launched is the PEP library. Okay, so people have been working on this in the background. There are some exemplars on the website, as you've probably accessed, but the format will be changed slightly. There will be what we call, as I said, a library of PEPs, where it will be changed, where you can actually select level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and there'll be a range of PEPs within each level that you can access. Now, that is almost completed, so that will be ready in a couple of weeks, hopefully before Christmas, where you can actually go in there, and that will be updated on a regular occurrence. So every year, probably twice a year, really, there'll be more and more PEPs in that library of PEPs, and it'll be structured so you can actually go and have a look at level 1, level 2 examples, level 3, etc., etc. And then with each PEP, you also have commentaries similar to what you've already got, but it will just be structured slightly different. So hopefully that will help with you accessing those exemplars. I believe that's happening with the practical performances as well. So just have a look out for that and wait for Penny's update. Now, there's no better way of deepening your understanding of a specification than becoming an examiner or moderator. There's probably some here already on this presentation. A greater understanding will no doubt be of tremendous benefit to your school and its students on their path to success for GCSE PE. Pearson often has opportunities for both examiners and moderators, so please visit the Pearson website for more details and vacancies. So Amy, I just saw your question popped up. I've applied twice to be an examiner, been accepted, but I've never been assigned any papers. Do you know why this might have been? Don't take it personal, Amy, but I think it's because maybe for that particular year, there have been quite a few examiners who applied and accepted, and maybe they didn't have enough contracts to hand out. But keep applying, and you might get an examiner role. Can one be an examiner internationally? Absolutely, they can be. There's no stipulation. I actually asked that question the other day to the board, and there's no issues with that. I actually know a couple of examiners who are based abroad, so no problem. You can apply. Also, if you want to become a moderator for Component 4, there are positions available for that. Look on the website, and if you don't mind hearing my voice again for another day's worth of training, then feel free to apply. Now, our subject advisor are experts in the field and always there to help. So please use the link on this page to find the subject advisor. And I think we all know who that is, and that's Penny Lewis. Does a good job. She usually gets back to you very quickly. So if there's any immediate questions, then please use the advice and service from Penny. To find out more about excellent number of courses that Pearson can offer, please visit the link on the slide, and it will take you to Pearson's Professional Development Academy website. This is where you'll be able to select PE and choose from several bespoke training courses. Now we're coming to the end of the presentation. You will be emailed a survey, I believe, where you can give feedback, and please be honest with your feedback. Not just feedback about the presentation, but also feedback about how things can be improved for the PEP in terms of resources, maybe further training as well. So yeah, be honest with that one. So I will stay on if you want to ask questions. If you want to use the microphone to talk, that's also fine. You can just raise a hand and I can activate that. But but if you are going to go and not stay on, I'd just like to thank you all for attending today and your contribution. I thought the contributions were very good from everyone, and I hope that the new teachers to Edexcel and to the PEP have found that very useful. The various discussions that were undertaken during the training module, were quite good. So thank you very much for that. I wish you all the best for the up and coming series, and I hope you find the training useful. I'll stay online for further questions, but if not, goodbye, good luck, and take care.